There is a bottle of sleeping pills on my nightstand. The doctor says take one. I usually take 3. It's the only way I can shut my brain off long enough to drift away, but even then, the dreams find me. In those dreams, I'm back in the damp, suffocating dark. I can feel the rough stone against my back. I can hear the heavy, wet breathing of something that shouldn't exist. My wife, Sarah. She tries to comfort me. She rubs my back when I wake up screaming, soaked in cold sweat. She tells me I'm home, that I'm safe in our house in Seattle, surrounded by concrete and streetlights. But she doesn't understand. She doesn't know what I know. Civilization is just a thin veneer, a fragile little bubble. And once you've popped it, once you've stepped into the real world, their world, you never truly come back. The thing that haunts me the most isn't the fear of death. It's the smell. It's permanently burned into my olfactory nerves. Imagine a wet dog that's been rolling in sulfur, rotting venison, and ancient pine needles, then magnified by 100. That is the scent of a Sasquatch den. It's a smell that triggers a primal alarm in the reptilian part of your brain, screaming at you to run. For 6 months, 183 agonizing days, I lived in that smell. I didn't just catch a blurry glimpse of a Bigfoot while hiking. I became a part of their pack. I lived in their cave system. I ate raw fish and grubs beside them. And I learned the most terrifying truth of all. They aren't just dumb animals. They have a society. They have a hierarchy. And most importantly, they have rules. They made it very clear to me. I was a guest, or perhaps a pet, or maybe just food being saved for winter. But to stay alive, I had to follow 3 specific terrifying rules. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that if I broke just one of them, I wouldn't be leaving that cave alive. I would be torn limb from limb. My name is Elias. I'm not a content creator, and I'm definitely not a conspiracy theorist. For 20 years, I worked as a timber cruiser for a private logging firm operating out of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. If you've never been to the Olympics, you can't understand the density of it. It's a temperate rainforest, a wall of green so thick that in some places, human feet haven't touched the ground in centuries. My job was to scout ahead of the logging crews, marking old-growth cedar and fir for harvest. It's lonely work. You spend weeks at a time with nothing but a topographic map, a compass, and the rain. You learn to read the woods. You know the difference between a bear scratch on a trunk and an elk rub. You know when the silence is peaceful and when the silence is watching you. It was late October when everything changed. The season was turning, bringing that biting, damp chill that settles deep in your joints and refuses to leave. I was scouting a remote tract of timber known on the company maps as Sector 4, but the old-timers at the diner in Forks called it the Devil's Throat. It was rough, unforgiving country, steep ravines filled with Devil's Club, unstable shale, and trees that blotted out the sky. I should have turned back around 3:12 p.m. The light was fading fast under the canopy, and the air pressure dropped like a stone. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, that instinctual feeling of being watched. But I was arrogant. I saw a massive stand of cedar across a ridge and thought about the bonus check I'd get for tagging it. So, I pushed on. That's when the fog rolled in. It didn't drift. It materialized. 1 minute I could see the ravine. The next I was swimming in a thick white soup that muffled all sound. I lost my bearings instantly. I took a step onto what looked like a mossy log, but it was just rot and air. The ground swallowed me. I fell. It wasn't a short tumble. I slid down a steep embankment of loose shale, tearing my clothes, battering my ribs against roots that protruded like skeletal fingers. I tumbled for what felt like an eternity, until I hit the bottom with a sickening crack. Pain exploded in my right leg, a white-hot bolt of agony that made me vomit bile into the dirt. I tried to stand, but my ankle collapsed under me. I was at the bottom of a deep limestone sinkhole maybe 40 feet down. I laid there for minutes, gasping, waiting for my eyes to adjust. It was pitch black, darker than any night I'd ever seen. The silence was absolute. And then, the silence broke. Huff, huff, huff. It was heavy, rhythmic breathing, wet and deep. It wasn't the rapid panting of a wolf or the snort of a bear. It sounded almost human, but way too large. With shaking hands, I unclipped my heavy-duty flashlight from my belt. My thumb hovered over the switch. I was terrified of what I might see, but the darkness was worse. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust and gloom. It didn't hit a rock wall. It hit fur. Dark, matted, coarse fur caked in mud. The beam traveled up a massive leg, thick as a tree trunk, past a torso that seemed to span the width of the tunnel. I tilted the light up, my hand trembling violently until the beam landed on a face. It was 8 feet off the ground. Wide, flat nose, skin like dark leather, and eyes, amber, intelligent, and glowing in the LED light. I wasn't alone in the hole, and I realized with a sinking horror that I hadn't just fallen into a pit. I had fallen into a living room. For a solid 10 seconds, neither of us moved. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when you are lying broken at the bottom of a pit, staring up at a biological impossibility, 10 seconds is a lifetime. My brain was misfiring, trying to categorize what I was seeing. Bear? No. Man in a suit? Impossible. The anatomy was too perfect, too functional. The light from my flashlight trembled in my hand, dancing across its chest. It was massive, barrel-chested, covered in that dark, matted hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. But it was the face that froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't the snarling monster of a horror movie poster. It was calm, terrifyingly calm. The skin around its eyes was dark and leathery, crinkled with deep lines like an old map. Its eyes, amber and wide-set, didn't blink. They were processing me, assessing me, not with the instinct of a predator looking at prey, but with the curiosity of a man looking at a bug he'd just found in his kitchen. I tried to scramble backward, digging my heels into the loose shale. That was a mistake. As soon as I put weight on my right leg, a jagged bolt of lightning shot up my thigh. I screamed. The sound echoed off the limestone walls, a raw, pathetic noise that sounded too small for the darkness. The creature's head snapped slightly to the side like a dog hearing a whistle. It didn't roar. It made a low, guttural vibration in its throat, a sound I felt in my own chest more than I heard with my ears. Rumph. Then, it moved. You expect something that size, easily 8.5 feet tall and pushing 800 pounds, to be slow, clumsy, but it closed the gap between us with a fluidity that was unnerving. In 2 strides, it was towering over me. The smell hit me then, a physical wave of musk, wet fur, and stale earth. It filled my nose, coating the back of my throat with a metallic tang. I raised my arm, a useless gesture of defense, bracing for the teeth, the tearing of flesh, but it didn't bite. A massive hand, the size of a catcher's mitt and tipped with thick black nails, reached down. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't an attack either. It grabbed the back of my heavy canvas coat. I felt the immense pressure, the sheer power in those fingers as they bunched the fabric. With a single heave, I was hoisted into the air. I dangled there, feet kicking helplessly, my broken ankle throbbing in time with my frantic heart rate. I'm a big guy, 6'2", 200 pounds. This thing lifted me like I was a rag doll. It turned away from the sinkhole opening, away from the faint gray light of the dying day, and walked toward the back of the cave, toward the dark. No, no, please, I yelled, thrashing against its grip. Put me down. The creature didn't even acknowledge my voice. It just tightened its grip slightly, enough to compress my ribs, stealing my breath. It stepped into a fissure in the rock wall that I hadn't seen before. We were leaving the surface world. The journey down is a blur of pain and sensory deprivation. The tunnel we moved through was tight for the creature. I could hear its shoulders brushing against the stone. Scrape, scuff, scrape. It carried me effortlessly, moving deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, heavy with moisture and the scent of minerals. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the heavy thud, thud, thud of its feet and my own ragged breathing. My flashlight, which I was still death-gripping, swung wildly, illuminating flashes of our descent, stalactites hanging like teeth, slick, wet walls, and then darkness again. I lost track of time. It could have been 10 minutes, it could have been an hour. The pain in my leg was making me delirious. I started to drift in and out of consciousness, the rhythmic swaying of the creature's gait lulling me into a terrifying stupor. Suddenly, the space opened up. The echoing sound of the creature's footsteps changed, becoming hollower, suggesting a massive cavern. The creature stopped. It grunted, a sharp cuckoo sound, and then dropped me. I hit the ground hard, landing on a pile of something soft and dry. Dried ferns, pine boughs, and hair. I scrambled back, pointing my light frantically around me. I wasn't in a simple cave. I was in a cathedral of stone. The ceiling was lost in the shadows high above. But what stopped my heart wasn't the geology. It was the eyes. Dozens of them. Reflecting the beam of my flashlight were multiple pairs of amber and green eyes staring back at me from the periphery of the chamber. I saw smaller shapes, juveniles, peeking from behind rock formations. I saw another massive figure, slightly smaller than the one that carried me, sitting near a ledge. I had been brought to the colony. The creature that brought me, the Alpha, I assumed, stepped into the center of the light. He looked down at me, then looked at the others. He made a series of complex vocalizations, not grunts, but a chatter that sounded like a distorted, guttural language. Whoop-whoop, gra-coo. He pointed a massive finger at me, then at a specific circle of stones near the wall. I dragged myself toward the wall, whimpering as my broken leg dragged over the rough stone floor. I huddled there, shivering, waiting to be eaten. I clutched my flashlight like a weapon, though I knew it was useless. The Alpha approached me one last time. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could see the moisture in his nostrils, the intelligence in those ancient eyes. He didn't growl. He simply exhaled a warm, foul breath into my face and tapped the ground 3 times with his index finger. Tap, tap, tap. Hard, deliberate. Then he pointed to the dark tunnel entrance we had just come from, and shook his massive head slowly. No. The message was clear, transcending any language barrier. You stay here. You do not leave. I clicked off my flashlight to save the battery, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I sat there listening to the breathing of the creatures around me, the shuffling of heavy bodies in the dark. I was miles from civilization, crippled and captive. The realization washed over me with a cold, numbing dread. I wasn't an explorer anymore. I was property, and my survival depended entirely on figuring out what they wanted from me. I don't know when I fell asleep that first night. It wasn't a restful sleep. It was a biological shutdown caused by shock. When I opened my eyes again, the cave was filled with a murky gray twilight, filtering down from some unseen crevices high above in the vaulted ceiling. The first thing I felt was the leg. The adrenaline had worn off, and what was left was a throbbing, sickening pulse of agony that radiated from my ankle up to my hip. I dared to look down. My boot was still on, but the leg above it was swollen to the size of a grapefruit. The skin stretched tight and turning a bruised, mottled purple. I knew I had to get the boot off before the circulation cut off completely, but the thought of moving it made me nauseous. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, my back against the cold stone wall. The cavern was immense, bigger than I had realized in the chaotic flashes of my flashlight the night before. It smelled of earth and musk, but also of something else. Wood smoke. Faint, old wood smoke. They were there. The Alpha, the massive male who had brought me down, was sitting near the center of the chamber, stripping the bark off a thick branch with his teeth. He looked like a mountain of muscle and hair. To his left, 2 smaller ones, maybe 6 feet tall, were grooming each other. And further back in the shadows I saw the eyes of others, watching, always watching. My throat was parched, dry as sandpaper. Water, I croaked. The word sounded alien in the silence. The Alpha stopped chewing. He turned that massive, heavy head toward me, and that's when I made my first mistake. I locked eyes with him. I stared right into those amber irises, pleading for help. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. He didn't stand up. He didn't run. He slammed his open palms against the stone floor. Bam! The sound was like a gunshot. He bared his teeth, square, yellow, and flat, but with canines that looked sharp enough to puncture steel, and let out a roar that wasn't a scream, but a blast of air and noise that vibrated my very skull. I instinctively curled into a ball, covering my head, looking at the dirt. I started shaking, waiting for the blow, but it never came. The silence returned. After a minute, I risked a glance upward, but I kept my head lowered, looking at his chest, not his eyes. He grunted, a softer sound this time, and went back to his branch. That was rule number 1. Never challenge the hierarchy. Eye contact is a challenge. Submission is survival. I sat there for hours, the thirst becoming a torture. I needed to formulate a plan. My mind raced through the survival handbooks I'd read over the years, assess the situation, find an exit, signal for help. But looking at the sheer drop of the walls and the massive sentinels guarding the only tunnel out, I realized those handbooks were written for people lost in the woods, not people held in a dungeon. Around midday, a female approached me. She was smaller than the alpha but still towered over me. Her fur was lighter, almost a reddish brown. She didn't look at me with aggression. She looked at me with curiosity. She dropped something at my feet. It was a fish, a steelhead trout, raw, bloody, and missing its head. Dirt clung to the wet scales. My stomach turned. "I can't," I whispered, pushing it away slightly. "I need fire. I need to cook it." She nudged it back toward me with her foot. Then she made a low, chuffing sound and tapped her own chest. She pointed at the fish, then at me. I realized then that this wasn't just feeding time. This was a test of integration. If I rejected their food, I was rejecting the pack. And in nature, outsiders don't last long. I picked up the fish. It was cold and slimy. I used my pocket knife, which, miraculously, they hadn't taken from me, to slice a strip of pink meat from the flank. I put it in my mouth. It tasted of river mud and blood. I gagged, forcing myself to swallow. The female watched me swallow. She made a soft, cooing sound, almost like a dove, and turned away. That was rule number 2. Accept the offering. You eat what the clan eats. You are not special. As the light began to fade again, the pain in my leg became unbearable. I needed to relieve the pressure. I knew if I didn't get that boot off, I might lose the foot. I grit my teeth and began to untie the laces. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the knot. When the boot finally slid off, I let out a scream of agony that I couldn't suppress. It echoed through the cavern. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The alpha stood up. The others went still. I wasn't just being noisy. I was being loud. And in their world, noise attracts danger. The alpha crossed the room in 3 strides. He loomed over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. He put a massive finger to his lips, a gesture so human it made my brain stutter, and hissed. A long, sharp intake of breath. Shh. He pointed toward the tunnel entrance, toward the surface world above. His eyes were wide, fearful. He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me. That was rule number 3, and perhaps the most important one. Absolute silence. There are things outside this cave that even the monsters are afraid of. I nodded, tears of pain streaming down my face, biting my lip until it bled to keep from screaming again. He watched me for a moment, satisfied that I understood, then returned to his post. I lay back against the cold stone, exhaustion washing over me. I looked at my swollen purple foot, then at the raw fish carcass, then at the massive shapes huddled in the darkness. I had a decision to make. I could try to crawl out of here, try to sneak past them in the dark on a broken leg, and likely die of exposure or be killed by whatever they were hiding from. Or I could accept my new reality. I could follow their rules. I looked at the alpha. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he was aware of my every breath. "Okay," I whispered into the dark, so soft only I could hear. "I'll play your game." I wasn't a man anymore. I was a member of the pack. And if I wanted to see my wife again, I had to stop thinking like a human and start thinking like a Sasquatch. It was roughly week 7 when the routine broke. By then, time had become a fluid, slippery thing. I measured days not by hours, but by the rhythms of the cave. The waking, the foraging parties leaving at dusk, the feeding, the sleeping. My leg had knitted together, but badly. It was a crooked, gnarly mess of calcium and scar tissue. I could hobble on it using a piece of driftwood the female, I started calling her matriarch, had brought me, but I was never going to win a foot race. I had become part of the furniture. The juveniles, initially terrified of the pale, hairless thing in the corner, now ignored me. I spent my days picking lice from my beard, staring at the rock walls and trying to keep the fire of my sanity from flickering out. Then came the vibration. It started low, a hum that I felt in my teeth before I heard it. The reaction in the cave was instantaneous and electric. The alpha, who had been dozing near the entrance, snapped awake. His head cocked. His nostrils flared so wide I could see the red inner lining. Then I heard it. The distinctive, rhythmic thwup, thwup, thwup of rotor blades chopping through the heavy mountain air. A helicopter. And not a high-altitude commercial flight. This was low. Treetop level. Search and rescue? My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This is it, I thought. They're looking for me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my makeshift crutch. Adrenaline flooded my system, washing away the pain in my leg. I opened my mouth to scream, to yell, "I'm here, I'm down here." But before I could draw a breath, the Alpha was on me. He didn't tackle me. He didn't hit me. He moved with a terrifying silence, crossing the chamber in a blur. He clamped a hand over my entire face, mouth and nose, stifling my cry before it could be born. His grip was iron, but his eyes were wide with panic. He dragged me, literally dragged me toward the back of the cave into the deepest, narrowest fissure, where the juveniles were already huddled. He shoved me into the darkness behind the matriarch. He wasn't keeping me from being rescued. He was hiding me. The helicopter hovered directly overhead. The sound was deafening, amplified by the acoustics of the sinkhole. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Then came the voices, not from the air, but from the rim of the sinkhole above. "Sector 4 clear. Thermal imaging shows a heat pocket down there. Dropping a puck." The voice was distorted, metallic, amplified by a loudspeaker or a radio. It didn't sound like the friendly voice of a park ranger. It sounded military, clinical, cold. Clack. Something hard hit the floor of the cavern near the entrance. A small black device about the size of a hockey puck. A red light blinked on it. Beep, beep, beep. The Alpha stood perfectly still in the shadows, blending into the rock so effectively that if I hadn't known he was there, I wouldn't have seen him. He wasn't breathing. None of them were. It was a stillness born of a lifetime of evasion. The voice from above crackled again. "Audio sensors active. Anything moving down there?" I lay there, sandwiched between a rock wall and the matriarch, my face pressed into her coarse, musky fur. I realized then that I had a choice. A terrible split-second choice. If I yelled, if I made a sound, those men up there would hear me. They would come down. I would be saved. But looking at the tactical precision, the thermal imaging, the pucks, I realized these weren't rescuers. You don't hunt lost hikers with thermal pucks. You hunt targets. If I screamed, they would come down, and they would see the Alpha. They would see the babies. And given the guns I heard clicking on their slings, I knew exactly what would happen. It wouldn't be a scientific discovery. It would be a slaughter. And I, the witness to a government secret or a private military operation, would likely be a loose end they'd be happy to tie up. My lungs burned. I wanted to cough. The dust from the ceiling was choking me. The tickle in my throat was agonizing. The matriarch turned her head slightly. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She knew. She knew I could end them. She gently placed a massive, calloused hand on my chest right over my heart. It was a plea. I closed my eyes. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I forced my body to go limp. I didn't scream. I didn't cough. I died inside, just a little bit. "Negative on audio," the voice said after an eternity. "Probably just a bear den. Heat signature is fading. Let's move to Sector 5. We have to sweep the whole ridge before nightfall." "Roger that." Moving out. The sound of boots crunching on shale faded. The helicopter engines whined as they spooled up and moved away. The silence returned to the cave, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a shared trauma. The Alpha didn't move for another hour. When he finally stepped out of the shadows, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like an old, tired man carrying the weight of the world. He walked over to the black puck still blinking on the floor. With a delicate touch, he picked it up, crushed it into dust with a single squeeze of his hand, and tossed the debris into a deep crevice. He turned to me. I was still huddled in the back. He walked over, looming above me. I flinched, expecting anger, expecting him to realize I was a liability. Instead, he reached down and touched my shoulder. A heavy, reassuring pat. He grunted, a low, rumbling sound that I felt in my bones. It wasn't a command. It was an acknowledgement. I had passed the ultimate test. I had chosen the tribe over my own kind. That night, for the first time, they didn't make me sleep on the periphery near the drafty entrance. The matriarch shuffled her nesting material, dried ferns and moss, and made a space closer to the center, near the warmth of the huddled group. I crawled into the spot. I was still a prisoner, yes, but the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just a captive anymore. I was an accomplice. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, I realized I was more afraid of the men in the helicopters than I was of the monsters sleeping beside me. Winter in the Olympic Mountains is not like winter anywhere else. It is a slow, suffocating violence. It doesn't just get cold. The world simply ceases to exist under a blanket of white concrete. The snow fell for 2 weeks straight, sealing the entrance of our sinkhole into a narrow, treacherous chute. The light in the cavern died, replaced by a perpetual, gloomy twilight. This was the season of the starving moon. That's what I called it in my head. By month 4, I had stopped looking like Elias, the timber cruiser. My beard was a tangled thicket reaching my chest, matted with grease and dirt. My clothes were tattered rags, stiff with dried blood and filth. I had lost 40 pounds. I could count every rib in my chest by running a finger over my skin. My broken leg ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm that predicted the weather better than any barometer. But the physical decay was nothing compared to the mental erosion. That was the true sacrifice. I realized one morning while scraping the marrow out of an elk femur with a sharp stone that I couldn't remember the color of my wife's eyes. Was it hazel or green? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to conjure her face, but it was like trying to hold on to smoke. The image dissolved. The sounds of the office, the taste of coffee, the feeling of clean cotton sheets, they were all fading, replaced by the immediate, brutal reality of the cave. Hunger, cold, sleep, fear. The pack was suffering too. The game had moved down into the valleys to escape the deep snow, far beyond the safe range of the alpha's territory. The rules kept them hidden, but the rules were also starving them. The juveniles were lethargic, their playful wrestling replaced by huddled, shivering silence. The alpha's coat had lost its luster. Patches of fur were falling out, revealing gray, leathery skin stretched tight over massive muscles. We were dying. Slowly. One night, the alpha returned from a hunt empty-handed for the 3rd time in a row. He collapsed near the fireless pit, his breathing ragged. The matriarch went to him, grooming his shoulder, making soft, mourning sounds. The smell of despair in that cave was thicker than the smell of musk. I looked at them. These monsters who could tear a man in half were fading away because they refused to go near the human settlements down the ridge where the deer were congregating. They would rather starve than risk exposure. They were prisoners of their own secrecy. I knew I had to do something. I wasn't strong like them. I couldn't chase down an elk in 3 feet of snow. But I had something they didn't. I had the knowledge of the enemy. I knew how humans built things. I limped over to the alpha. I didn't make eye contact. Rule number 1 was burned into my soul now. But I tapped the ground near his head. I drew a shape in the dirt. A box. A line. A snare. I pantomimed a rope. I pointed to the scavenged paracord I still had in my pocket. 50 feet of survival cord I'd never used. Then I pointed to the tunnel entrance. Let me hunt. He looked at me. For a long moment I thought he would strike me. To let the pet leave the cave alone was a violation of security. But he looked at the starving juveniles. He looked at my gaunt face. The desperation in his eyes outweighed the caution. He grunted once. A low, affirmative rumble. Go. I crawled out of the sinkhole into the blinding white world. The air was so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. I didn't run. I didn't head for the logging road. I didn't look for a ranger station. My mind didn't even process the idea of escape. I had a job to do. My pack was hungry. I moved down the ridge toward a game trail I had spotted weeks ago. I found a narrow choke point between 2 massive fir trees. With freezing fingers that felt like wooden blocks, I set up a primitive snare trap using the paracord and a heavy sapling bent under tension. It was a twitch-up snare. Illegal, cruel, and highly effective. I waited. I buried myself in a snowdrift, wrapped in my tattered canvas coat, shivering so violently my teeth chattered a rhythm against my tongue. Hours passed. The sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of violet and blood orange. Then, a young buck stepped onto the trail. He was struggling in the deep snow, his breath puffing in clouds. He stepped through the loop. Snap. The sapling whipped up. The cord cinched. The buck was hoisted into the air, thrashing wildly. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel the remorse a modern hunter might feel. I felt a surge of predatory joy so intense it nearly made me dizzy. I scrambled out of the drift, pulled my knife, and finished it. Dragging that carcass back up the ravine was the hardest physical thing I have ever done. I was weak, starving, and working on one good leg. I had to crawl, pulling the weight inch by inch. I vomited twice from exertion, but I didn't stop. When I finally shoved the carcass over the lip of the sinkhole and tumbled down after it, the cave went silent. The alpha approached the dead deer. He sniffed the cord around its neck. He looked at the clean cut on its throat. He looked at me. He didn't bow. He didn't thank me. But he tore a massive chunk of the flank loose, the prime meat, and instead of eating it himself, he handed it to me first. The matriarch took the rest to the juveniles. The sound of tearing flesh and chewing filled the cave, a grotesque symphony that sounded like music to my ears. I sat there, blood staining my hands, eating raw venison with a ferocity that scared me. I caught my reflection in a pool of meltwater near the wall. A wild, bearded stranger stared back. I had saved them, but in doing so, I had severed the last tether to my old life. Elias the timber cruiser wouldn't have killed like that. Elias the timber cruiser wouldn't have eaten raw meat in a cave. I leaned back against the stone, my belly full for the first time in months. I tried to think of my wife's name. It took me a full minute to find it. Sarah. It felt like a word from a foreign language. I was surviving, but the price of admission to this world was my humanity. And as the winter howled outside, sealing us in, I wasn't sure if I wanted it back. The thaw didn't happen all at once. It started with the sound, a persistent rhythmic drip, drip, drip echoing through the cavern as the snowpack above began to melt. Sunlight, real sunlight, began to pierce the gloom of the sinkhole entrance, cutting through the stagnant air like a golden blade. But as the world woke up, I was shutting down. The winter had carved away my reserves. The malnutrition, the stress, and the damp cold of the stone floor had finally caught up with me. It started as a tickle in my chest, then a cough that tasted like rust, and finally a fever that hit me like a freight train. I remember waking up shivering so violently that my teeth clacked together uncontrollably. My skin burned, but I felt like I was encased in ice. I curled into a fetal ball near the dying embers of our small fire, gasping for air. Every breath was a battle against the fluid filling my lungs. Pneumonia. I knew the symptoms well enough from the old logging camps. Without antibiotics, without a hospital, this was a death sentence. I drifted into a delirium. The cave walls seemed to breathe. The stalactites twisted into faces of people I used to know. My boss, my mother, Sarah. They were all screaming at me silently. I fully expected the pack to leave me. In the wild, a sick animal is a liability. A sick animal slows down the herd. I waited for the alpha to drag me to the edge of the sinkhole and toss me out to let nature take its course. That was the law of the wild. But they didn't. I woke up from a fever dream to feel something cool and wet on my forehead. I cracked my eyes open, my vision swimming. It was the matriarch. She was kneeling beside me, her massive bulk creating a wall of warmth against the draft. In her hand, she held a clump of moss soaked in ice-cold meltwater. She dabbed my face with a tenderness that defied her size. Her large dark eyes were filled with a profound, sorrowful concern. She turned to the side and picked up a crude stone bowl. Inside was a greenish, pungent paste. She had chewed up roots, devil's club, and willow bark maybe, and mixed it with water. She scooped some onto her finger and pressed it to my cracked, bleeding lips. "No," I croaked, trying to turn away. The smell was bitter. She made a soft, insistent cooing sound. It was the same sound she made for the juveniles. She wasn't asking. She was mothering. I opened my mouth. She smeared the paste onto my tongue. It tasted vile, like earth and bitterness, but as I swallowed, I felt a strange numbness coating my throat. Willow bark. Nature's aspirin. They knew medicine. For 3 days and 3 nights, I floated in the abyss between life and death, and for 3 days and 3 nights they never left me alone. The juveniles would come and sit by my feet, watching me with wide, curious eyes. One of them, the smallest one I had mentally named Scout, brought me his favorite toy, a polished river stone, and placed it on my chest. It was a gesture of such pure, innocent empathy that it broke my heart. The alpha was the most surprising. He didn't nurse me, but he stood guard. He sat at the entrance of the fissure where I lay, his back to me, facing the darkness of the main cavern. He was ensuring that nothing, not the other males, not a draft, not a shadow, disturbed my recovery. He was the sentinel. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. I woke up soaked in sweat, weak as a kitten but clear-headed. The weight on my chest was gone. I sat up, groggy. The matriarch was sleeping nearby. Hearing me move, she snapped awake. When she saw me sitting up, her face transformed. It wasn't a smile. Their facial muscles don't work like ours. but her eyes softened, and she let out a long, shuddering breath. She reached out and groomed my hair, her thick, rough fingers gently combing through the tangles of my beard, picking out bits of dirt and dried leaves. It is a feeling I cannot fully describe to you. To be groomed by an 800-pound apex predator is to feel a level of safety that doesn't exist in the human world. It is primal. It is an acceptance so deep it bypasses language. I looked at her and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She leaned her forehead against mine. Just for a second, a transfer of energy. In that moment, the lines blurred completely. I wasn't Elias the prisoner anymore. I was Elias the kin. I looked around the cave, at the alpha sharpening a stick, at Scout playing with a bone, at the matriarch tending to me, and I realized something terrifying. I loved them. I didn't just respect them. I didn't just fear them. I loved them. They had saved me when my own kind would have likely walked past me on the trail. They possessed a loyalty and a gentleness that civilization had bred out of us. Later that afternoon, I sat near the entrance of the sinkhole, watching the sunlight play on the wet rocks. The alpha came and sat next to me. We didn't look at each other. We just watched the light. He reached into a pouch of skin he wore, a crude sort of bag tied with sinew, and pulled out a handful of dried berries. He offered them to me. I took them. Our fingers brushed. His skin was rough like sandpaper, but his touch was careful. I ate the berries, looking out at the patch of blue sky visible through the hole. I knew the snow was melting. I knew the logging roads would be opening up soon. I knew that my window to escape was approaching. But for the first time in 6 months, the thought of leaving didn't bring me relief. It brought me a sharp, stinging panic. How could I leave them? How could I go back to a world of taxes and traffic and noise and leave this family behind? The bond was forged. It was iron strong, and I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that this love would be my undoing. Because the world outside, the world of men, it doesn't tolerate monsters, and it definitely doesn't tolerate the men who love them. The end didn't come with a bang. Not at first. It came with the smell of diesel. It was mid-May. The forest was fully awake, bursting with aggressive greens and the songs of nesting birds. I had been allowed further from the sinkhole recently, tasked with gathering fiddlehead ferns near the stream. The alpha trusted me. The rules had become second nature to me. Move silently, stay downwind, freeze at the snap of a twig. I moved like a ghost through the underbrush, my tattered clothes blending perfectly with the moss and shadows. I was digging for roots when the wind shifted. The sweet scent of cedar was instantly replaced by the thick, oily stench of unburnt fuel and exhaust. Then came the sound. The grinding, metal-on-metal screech of heavy machinery. Bulldozers. Feller bunchers. They were close. Much closer than they should have been. The logging company had pushed the boundary of Sector 4. They were cutting a road right through the ridge that sheltered our sanctuary. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. I dropped my basket of ferns and scrambled back up the slope toward the sinkhole. I had to warn them. I had to get them underground before the noise brought the curious eyes of the crew. But I was too late. When I crested the ridge, I saw them. Not loggers. Not guys in hard hats with chainsaws. These men were wearing tactical gear. Gray fatigues, no insignias, carrying rifles that looked like AR platforms but heavier. Private military contractors. The company knew there was something out here. They weren't here to log, they were here to clear. They were standing at the edge of the sinkhole. "Contact!" one of them shouted. His voice was distorted by a radio headset, but it cut through the morning air like a whip crack. I froze. They hadn't seen me. They were looking down into the pit. A roar erupted from the earth. It wasn't the warning grunt the alpha had given me months ago. This was a war cry. It shook the leaves off the trees. The alpha surged out of the sinkhole, moving with a speed that defied physics. He wasn't running away. He was charging. He was drawing their fire to buy time for the matriarch and the juveniles to escape through the back tunnels. "Open fire! Target active!" The sound of automatic gunfire is deafening in the woods. It doesn't sound like the movies. It sounds like the sky is ripping apart. Crack, 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 crack. I watched in horror as the alpha took the hits. Puffs of red mist and fur exploded from his chest and shoulder. But he didn't stop. He hit the first mercenary like a freight train, sweeping his massive arm in a backhand arc. I heard the sickening crunch of bones breaking. and the man went flying 20 feet into a tree, landing in a broken heap. The other 3 men scrambled back, widening their formation, pouring fire into the beast. "No!" I screamed. I couldn't help it. The word tore out of my throat before I could stop it. I broke from the tree line, waving my arms. "Stop! Don't shoot him!" The distraction worked, but not in the way I wanted. The mercenaries turned their guns toward me. The Alpha, bleeding from a dozen wounds, saw me running toward the gunfire. He saw his pet, his pack member, running into the kill zone. He roared again, a sound of pure anguish, and changed direction. He lunged between me and the gunman. A fresh volley of bullets tore into his back. The sound of the impacts was wet and heavy. Thud, thud, thud. The Alpha stumbled. His massive legs, which had carried me to safety, which had chased down elk, finally gave out. He crashed to his knees, the earth trembling under his weight. He looked at me. His amber eyes were dimming, losing that intelligent spark. There was no accusation in them, only a final, silent command. Run. He collapsed forward, his heavy breathing turning into a wet gurgle. Hold fire! Hold fire! The lead mercenary shouted. "We got a civilian! Secure the area!" 2 of the men rushed me. I fought them. I kicked, I bit, I clawed. I wasn't fighting like a man. I was fighting like a wild animal. I wanted to kill them. I wanted to tear their throats out for what they had done. "Get him down! Tase him!" I felt the prongs hit my chest. A surge of electricity locked my muscles, and I dropped to the dirt, convulsing. My face was pressed into the pine needles mere feet from the Alpha's massive hand. His fingers twitched once, then went still. "Check the hole. Flush it out," the leader barked. One of the men unclipped a grenade, flashbang or frag, I couldn't tell, and tossed it into the sinkhole. Boom. The ground heaved. A cloud of dust and smoke billowed out of the entrance. I screamed into the dirt, a guttural wail of grief. The matriarch, Scout, the babies. They were down there. "Clear," the radio crackled. Entrance collapsed. "Nothing's coming out of there." They hauled me up. My hands were zip-tied behind my back. My vision was blurry from tears and the shock of the taser. I looked at the Alpha's body one last time. He looked smaller in death, just a pile of fur and blood. The monster who had shown me more humanity than these men ever would. "Who the hell are you?" the team leader asked, grabbing my beard and forcing my head up. He looked at my rags, my emaciated frame. "Jesus. Command, we have a feral survivor. Looks like the missing cruiser from last fall." They dragged me toward an idling black SUV that had just pulled up the new logging road. As they shoved me into the back seat, the smell of the leather interior made me gag. It smelled of chemicals. It smelled of death. I looked out the back window as we drove away. The smoke from the sinkhole was rising into the canopy, mixing with the morning mist. My family was gone. The rules were broken. And I was being taken back to the world of men, a world that suddenly felt like the true prison. The first thing I remember is the white, blinding, antiseptic white. White sheets, white walls, white ceiling tiles with little perforations that looked like accusing eyes. And the smell. It wasn't the rich, honest smell of musk and pine. It was the sharp chemical stench of bleach and floor wax. It burned my nose. I was in a private room at a military hospital in Bremerton. Or maybe it was a private facility. There were no logos on the nurses' scrubs. I was handcuffed to the bed rail. For the first 2 days, they didn't ask me anything. They just pumped me full of fluids and sedatives. I drifted in a haze, dreaming of the damp cave floor, waking up screaming because the sheets felt too soft, too suffocating. On the 3rd day, the suits came. 2 of them. One older, gray-haired, with eyes like a shark. The other younger, holding a tablet. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't ask how I was feeling. "Mr. Vance," the older one said. His voice was smooth, devoid of any jagged edges. "We need to go over your statement regarding the events in Sector 4. I tried to sit up, the handcuffs clinking against the metal rail. "They killed him," I rasped. My voice was a wreck, unused to forming English words. "Your men, they slaughtered him. He was protecting me." The older man sighed, looking at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. He glanced at the younger one, who tapped something on his screen. "Mr. Vance, you've been through a severe trauma. You've been missing for 6 months. The doctors tell us you're suffering from acute hypothermia, malnutrition, and a condition known as psychogenic fugue. It's common for the brain to invent guardians to cope with the isolation. It wasn't a fugue, I spat. It was a family. There were juveniles, a female. You blew up the sinkhole. The man leaned in close. He smelled of peppermint and expensive cologne. It made me nauseous. Listen carefully, Elias. There was no family. There was a bear den. You fell in. You survived by scavenging. We found a feral black bear in the area and neutralized it. That is the official report. That is the truth. He placed a document on the tray table. A non-disclosure agreement. Thick, comprehensive. If you sign this, you go home to Sarah. You get your back pay. You get a pension. If you don't, well, men in your mental state belong in institutions. Indefinitely. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the man's eyes. And suddenly, I remembered rule number 1. Submission is survival. If I fought them, I would die in a cage. If I bared my teeth, they would crush me just like they crushed the alpha. To survive this new jungle, I had to do exactly what I did in the cave. I had to play by their rules. I lowered my eyes. I slumped my shoulders. I let the fight drain out of my face. A bear, I whispered, forcing a tremble into my voice. It was just a bear? The man smiled. A predator's smile. That's right, just a bear. I took the pen with a shaking hand and signed my name. I signed away the truth to buy my freedom. Going home was the hardest part. Sarah was there, crying, holding me so tight I thought I'd snap. But when I hugged her back, I felt nothing. She felt fragile. She smelled of lavender soap, a scent that now registered to my brain as poison. I tried to reintegrate. I really did. I shaved the beard. I put on the flannel shirts. I went to the grocery store. But the grocery store was a nightmare. The bright lights, the endless aisles of packaged food, the people chattering about nothing. It was sensory overload. I found myself scanning the perimeter for threats. I found myself walking on the balls of my feet to silence my steps. I stopped sleeping in the bed. The mattress was too soft. It felt like I was sinking into quicksand. Sarah would find me in the morning, curled up on the hardwood floor in the corner of the living room, wrapped in a wool blanket. She stopped asking why after a month. I kept the secret. I kept the silence. Rule number 3. But I noticed things I never noticed before. I noticed how loud we are. Humans are the noisiest things on the planet. We scream our presence to the world. I noticed how wasteful we are. We throw away food that could feed a clan for a week. I noticed how blind we are. We look at the woods and see lumber, or a hiking trail. We don't see the eyes watching back. 6 months have passed since I signed that paper. I'm physically healthy now. My leg has healed, though I still walk with a limp, a permanent reminder of the descent. But I'm not Elias anymore. Elias died in that sinkhole. I am something else. A hybrid. A creature caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Sometimes late at night I drive out to the edge of the logging roads, miles from Sector 4. I turn off the engine and just sit there in the dark, rolling down the window to let the cold air in. I listen. I listen for the thud, thud, thud of heavy footsteps. I listen for the whoop of a call. Last week, I heard it. Faint, distant, miles deep in the restricted zone where the government says nothing exists. A wood knock, clack, followed by a long, mournful howl that made the hair on my arms stand up. The matriarch. She's alive. They didn't get them all. I smiled in the darkness. Tears ran down my face, freezing in my beard. They are still out there. They are still following the rules. And now, I have a new rule of my own. Rule number 4. Tell the story. Not to the police, not to the news, but to you, the people who need to know. Because one day you might step off the trail. One day the fog might roll in. And if you find yourself in the dark, staring into amber eyes, you need to know what to do. You need to know the rules. They say that time heals all wounds. That's a lie. People tell themselves to sleep better at night. Time doesn't heal anything. It just covers the wound with leaves. It lets the moss grow over the scar until you can't see it anymore. But if you press down just a little bit, the pain is still fresh. It's still bleeding underneath. I am back in the world of men now. I pay my bills. I mow my lawn. I drive a truck that doesn't smell like fear. To my neighbors, I'm just Elias, the guy who got lost in the woods and got lucky. They look at me with pity. They think I survived an accident. They don't understand that I didn't survive an accident. I survived a revelation. I look at the cities now, Seattle, Portland, Tacoma, and I don't see progress. I see cages. We build these concrete boxes to keep the wild out, to convince ourselves that we are the masters of this planet. We put up streetlights to push back the dark. We make noise to drown out the silence. But it's all an illusion, a thin, fragile shell, because I know what's waiting just beyond the tree line. I know that there is a world older than ours, deeper than ours, and far more honest than ours. A world where money means nothing, where lies don't work, and where respect is the only currency that matters. Sometimes when I'm walking down a busy street, I'll catch a whiff of something, damp earth or rotting pine or just a hint of musk, and for a split second, the concrete vanishes, the buildings dissolve, and I'm back in the cave. I can feel the warmth of the matriarch's fur. I can see the alpha's amber eyes glowing in the dark, reminding me of who I really am. I miss him. I miss the monster more than I ever liked the men who killed him. So, take this story for what it is. Maybe you think I'm crazy. Maybe you think this is just a campfire tale. That's fine. Think what you want. But do me a favor. The next time you go hiking, the next time you step off the trail to take a picture or find a quiet spot, listen. Really listen. If the woods go silent, if the birds stop singing and the wind dies down, don't be curious. Don't be brave. Remember the rules. Lower your eyes. Make no sound. And back away slowly. Because you are not the hunter. You are a guest in their house, and they are always watching. This story is my confession. If you believe that there are truths hidden in the wild that we are not meant to find, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. I have more stories from the deep woods, more secrets that the agency doesn't want you to hear. Stay safe out there, and stay on the trail.